I don't suggest we do a tutorial about how to start the system up, because at the moment that would require running Purple Service Manager, which appears in the system tray, and then you have to right-click Check Now on it, and then it starts all these myriad windows, and that just looks awful. And I would kind of hope that eventually we'll figure out a way of tidying that up, but it's also one of those ugly things that you really don't... People who are living with this will know this already. They'll probably not like it, but it is what it is. What I'm starting up here is the December build that I've been using for demos. There is obviously the new, what we've been referring to as the new NMOS world that Miguel's been working on, rewriting all the scripts. So functionally it achieves much the same thing. The auto-trans is slightly cleaner into the way it appears on screen in terms of transition, but in terms of what I can show you today, it's all the same. Should be. If the scripts are right, then it should be the same. Our use of the word NMOS, we've kind of bastardized it. It's unofficial. We're talking about it as an event message protocol. So it's a way to signal that events are happening across a network. But there's a multicasted message. Yeah, so when you press a button, it sends a message out on the network to say this button has been pressed. This is its unique ID. It came from this machine, and then in this case, our system controller, the Lua script processing logic, processes that and decides what it does as a result of that. So yeah, all of the logic is defined from that. I'm just going to quickly, just because it looks tidier, start there, because I had two tally lights lit up, which of course is impossible and should never happen. Not unless you're in a transition where both doing a vision mix. So looking at the user interface, we've got in Flyaway will only ever have 3 sources. A Flyaway++ system may have more, but this is very much geared to Flyaway as a product. Flyaway++ would be potentially a dual screen layout or multiple clients connected together. So what we've got on here is our 3 sources along the top. These are being displayed at a controlled time offset. That's an important, I suppose the operator doesn't necessarily need to know that, but that's how it works. And then we have a program and a preview output, which is familiar to most people who do vision mixes. The program is what goes out to air, that's what the viewers see, and the preview allows you to check a source or check what the result of a transition will look like before taking it to air. So you can use this to look at both the video, any overlays, and potentially change the audio state as well and monitor the audio state prior to doing a transition with the auto trans button, at which point it will basically put that on air, as it were. So the first style of operation on this is by far the easiest, which is just the straight control of the program bus. So the row of buttons we have, you'll notice there's 2 distinct rows. So we think of that as the program bus and the preset bus, the top row and the bottom row. The program bus controls the program mixer. The preset bus controls the preview mixer. It's more of a historic reason why or technical reason why it's preset and preview in a real vision mixer, whereas we're just representing the whole bus is the state of that as what you see on this preview mixer. There's a bit more complexity to this central auto trans section in a real vision mixer. You can choose, do you want to transition the background, which is the main video, or do you want to transition the keys, which are the overlays? And if you only transition the keys, even if I have here like SDI2 is lit up, if you set it only to be a key transition, you'd see the metronome ticking on the preview mixer here, because it's showing you a preview of what the result of the transition will be. After basically the result of pressing auto trans is what that shows you. But we've carried on calling it preset and preview. Again, that's more background. I don't think you need to explain too much. Just kind of say it matter-of-factly. This is the preset bus, and it controls what the preview mixer is. Now, important for the architecture side of this is these are using the proxy sources that are the same sources as displayed above, and any commands that we make on our client are sent across the network to the Flyaway unit that's located at a remote site, and they are actioned upon on the high-res content at a slightly delayed time to allow us to do frame accurate switching. And that's the kind of sweet spot message of what the whole pitch is really. So to control the background sources, the main video sources, we do what's called hot cutting. Now, typically you can use a mouse or you can use a button panel to switch between them. The button panel, this button panel seems to be a bit duff. I managed to fix it in Germany by banging it, but yeah, so we'll use the mouse for now. So you can see as I switch between it, it just cuts between all the transitions. So these are one frame you're looking at one source, the next frame you're looking at another source. That is what most people would call hot cutting. So clearly we can switch between different sources, and we see that change immediately on the program. And if we had got visibility of the high res, you'll see it switching in this setup about a second later. But obviously that time offset is configurable, and importantly, all the operator here needs to know is this simulates what the program is, and what it shows is what's going to happen, and is what happens. And we'll put some warning messages on screen if for some reason there's a technical fault that means it isn't going to happen. So that's hot cutting on the background.
What's the lowest theoretical latency between the client and the server?
If you want to achieve frame accurate cutting, so that if I click on the button and see up that frame, I want it to switch on that frame, I think it's about four or five frames probably, assuming the message gets there in an instant, which in the IP world it typically does, unless it's going over a real distant link. So yeah, it's probably 4 frames minimum, but probably half a second to be safe, just to make sure. So the other thing we can do with main video transitions are the overlays, and we have 4 overlays configured in Flyaway. Behind the scenes, you sometimes see them configured as DSK 1, 2, 3, 4. DSK standing for downstream key. That just means they're keyed downstream of the main video transitions, if you like. So they're on top of it. In this case we have 4, and they are, if they could stack on top of each other, DSK 4 would be in front of 3, which is in front of 2, which is in front of 1. So you can see. Now in this particular case, we turn them on, they appear, we turn them off, they disappear. We can change the behavior of which they turn on and off by clicking on the transition button above it. So if I go S for slow and then click on it to turn it off, you'll see it fades off. Click on it again, it fades on. Click on F for fast and it fades off. It fades on just much faster. I guess a separate set of videos is configuring the parameters like that. The transition durations of which those fast, medium and slow have an effect of are configured up the top here. So if, for example, I do slow and put it to 99, which is the maximum value that field can hold, because the UI is only limited to 2 characters, so we've limited it to 99 frames, which is about 4 seconds, so more than enough for anybody. No one would really want to go that high, you'd think. But now if I click, okay, that's still on fast. If I go slow and click it on, you see it takes 4 seconds to appear. And that's really controlling the video side of things. One very non-standard thing, which is not common to most vision mixers, is that we can also choose a transition type when you're hot cutting. So notice that I had it set to C for cut when I was showing the cut transitions. If I switch to slow and then switch to something, you see it does a slow mix. So I can transition that way. Again, this is not particularly a standard thing that you'd ever do with the vision mixer. Normally that would be cutting. You would only have the ability to cut because it really is just a cross point switch on a vision mixer. But again, we're not just trying to recreate a vision mixer, we're trying to create a useful tool. I'll explain the auto button a bit later, that's a bit more complicated. So you can see how I can turn them on and off. Audio is very similar. You can see at the moment audio channel 1 is active, and as a result you can see these fader levels aren't affected by the slider position. They're what's called pre-fade listens. If I turn on the audio monitor for this, it puts it into my ear, so you'll now hear tick-tock, tick-tock from the metronome, and that's on. If I turn on for this one, you can hear me talking because that's the camera in the room, And if I turn it on for this, we hear CBBS, but I can turn multiple ones on simultaneously, and I'm hearing them all in my ears right now. So the monitoring of the audio is just a simple on-off to sum it together. And it's completely irrelevant in this case what the status of the sliders is. It's just listening to what the channel is. In the case of listening to the program output though, or potentially the preview output, if I click on the program output here, this is affected by the master volume, because ultimately you're monitoring what the final output of the system will be, and because that is directly impacted by this fader, we've set that to be to monitor it appropriately, so that if you have lowered the volume, it's very obvious in your ear. If we hadn't done that, you might not have noticed. Yes, this slider affects TX. It actually adjusts the mix of the level on both the program and the preview mixers. So that's why it's in the middle. And if I put it to both, you'll see the VU meters on program and preview have gone. If I bring it back up, then you can see it puts them back. You can see there's audio on the preview channel as well. Again, I'm not talking about the preview yet, but you can see that's why. It's because audio 2 is there, which is a different source. If I change the level of audio 1 on here, you can see obviously it's passing through a lot lower level now, coming through onto the program mix. Again, it doesn't impact the monitoring of what the source audio is. So that just allows you to monitor what audio is, and then based on the levels, which we can move on the fader or with a mouse. Typically, people will prefer faders for these because it's more natural to be able to do it with that. If you want to quickly restore a fader to 0 dB, which is the 100%, the unity level, if you like, you can right-click on the fader and it puts it straight to the 0 dB. So you can get that through. So I'm going to turn that off because otherwise it's going to be on the video and it'll do people's head in. I've kind of got used to phasing this thing out. So controlling audio is very similar. Now, if I turn it on and off with a button, you can see in this case it went up and down relatively slowly. We have a similar set of transitions here. So just like before, I can do cut, and then it goes very fast on, very fast off. It's actually 10 milliseconds it's doing it, so we don't ever truly do a full cut, because if you did that you might get square waves in the audio waveform and it would sound very bad. So it's as good as fast as you can turn it on. And obviously if I do a slow, it'll take 4 seconds to fade all the way up. Again, 4's a bit extreme, so I'm going to put that back down to 30 frames, which seems a bit more reasonable. And essentially that's it for the kind of main program bus, how you turn things on and turn things off. For the audio, you'll notice as well that there's a display of the current level directly below the button. So as it changes, you can see it's changing here, 0 dB, all the way down to -96, which is mute level, muted. What else is there? So I'm going to put that back to cut, so it's nice and fast. And we can then essentially control the preset bus in exactly the same way. Now, because the preset bus isn't a live output that anyone's seeing, it is only really used for previewing something, everything just cut transitions on that, because it's just about putting that state on. So if you have that bar here, DSK1, for example, even though if I turn it on and off on the program bus, you see it fade on, fade off, that is a transition on the live output. That's why it's the fully produced output. On the preview output, it's just showing you what the state of that configuration of the program bus would look like when you transition it to the master. So there are no transitions, if you like, when you turn things on and off on the preset bus. Same with the audio. If we turn it on and off with this, you'll see it immediately, even if I set this to slow and watch the VU meters appear. In fact, I'll turn it on so you can hear it in my ear. Let's turn on the CBBS video on the preset click, we hear it immediately. Don't get too close. Off. Whereas if we turn that on the program bus, let's just turn that off and listen to the program bus. If we turn it on the program bus, we can see it fading. So again, we only have transitions on the program bus. So once we've decided on a state for our preset bus. You can see I can, in this case I've got SDI1 is currently on air with this big bar graphic on. I'm then going to transition to SDI2 with the SuitcaseTV logo, which is DSK2, and it's going to transition the audio to audio 2. I can then, in this central section here, in Autotrans, I can choose the behavior of that transition. Do I want it to be a cut or a mix? Do I want it fast, medium and slow mix? And it's exactly the same transition parameters. If I do a slow mix and then hit Autotrans, the effect will be you see all the transitions take effect, and then at the end of the transition, the states of the two buses swap. Now at the moment in this version of the logic, it's not doing it very well. It's doing it terribly badly at the moment actually. You wouldn't really expect to see anything change on the program bus until the end of the auto transition event. So when you film this on with Miguel's logic, it will look a lot better. That basically whilst the auto trans button lights up red to show you there's a transition in progress, and then only at the end of that transition does that whole state flip-flop. The reason it does it that way is because on a traditional vision mixer, next to your auto trans button, you might also have a T-bar, the physical bar that you can move up and down, and because you can therefore start transitioning and then change your mind and go back, if you started changing the state of the program bus as soon as you started the transition, it wouldn't make sense. You're using that T-bar to transition between those two states, and only at the end does it trigger that flip-flop action. So we're trying to mimic that same behavior in case we ever do put the T-bar back on. And we might choose to put a T-bar on in the future, but again, it's mimicking the behavior of the way a vision mixer works. And if we do a cut transition, you'll see the same thing happens. It transitions. Now, that's the kind of, if you like, the basics. In terms of extras that you might like, we could, rather than just simply transitioning the audio from one to the other, let's say we want to transition to a more complex mix, so we could preview the audio on the preset bus, bring up this audio levels panel here, and actually say, actually I want my next event to still have a bit of audio on, but maybe a bit lower level. So, and actually maybe this is a bit loud, so I can use this pop-up window to tailor the settings of the audio on the preset bus. Not everyone will want to do this. This is very much dependent on the type of production and whether or not it's of any use to people.
If you had someone commentating an event, is this where you would say always keep this?
Yeah, chances are if you're commentating a live event and you've got lots of live audio, typically you might not use this in the transitions at all. You may not use the buttons at all. Your options for controlling the audio are clicking on buttons to turn them on and off, or using the sliders. And if you're using the sliders, generally you probably wouldn't necessarily mess around with presetting them at all. You'd just do the transition on program preset on the video side of things, and as the transition's active, you'd probably pull the audio fader down or change the state. So it really depends. If it's something where you're doing lots of uncontrolled sources, so microphone inputs, then you're probably going to ride the faders because it gives you more control. If you're switching between different feeds, you're using iPhrame more like BBC Scotland with the live compliances. It's feed 1 or feed 2, and it's the audio levels are already controlled. You're just turning them on or off. In that case, you can get away with using the buttons because the levels are already okay. And then halfway in between, it may be that once you've set the level, this remembers which level you go to. So you see I've got this set at the moment minus 5.2. If I turn it off and turn it back on again, it comes back to 5.2. So it does remember the state when you turn them on and off with the buttons. So in this case here, and this is going to do your head in when you play this back because it's playing my speech back at the same time. So let's finish this off. Let's do this auto trans, and you'll see the effect. I'll put it over there. So when I do auto trans, you'll see it takes the state and it swaps the state between the two. So it's basically ducked down the sound of the metronome, and I'll turn off my monitor, and it's just swapped the two states round. And we can keep doing that and swap them back. Now, as a visual indicator to highlight to you, if I close that window, that there is a different level on the preset bus to the program, that's this little red box here. We call this split audio. So if you open up the audio levels, because we've got more space in this pop-up, there's a whole button that says split level enable. Essentially that red marker between there and between here is just indicating that that split state exists. If you don't want that split state to exist, you can either click on the split level enable button to turn it off, click on the red bit here, or click on the red bit here, and all of them will have the same effect. I'll click on this one here, click, and what that means is I don't want there to be a split level. I want the same level to be used, and therefore you see as soon as I clicked it, it's put my preset bus back to the same level. So again, if I now move my master level, they track. So they're automatically tracking together because it knows that I didn't want the split level. And if I'm controlling the program, I probably want, when I transition, because it's active on the preset, I want that to be the same level too. Because the preset bus, though, is somewhere you wouldn't normally be controlling with the hard panel, if you've opened up this window and you change the slider on the preset, that's how you get that split level state. So the split is basically by moving the slider on the preset bus whilst the program is active with a different level. If I turn on 3, for example, and do the level on here, it doesn't call split level because this isn't active. And in fact, if I set that, maybe I've turned on the monitoring and I've heard it, and I might be using this to, let's turn them off. I might be using this to work out what level I want that channel to be. I then turn it on the program, and you'll see it goes to that level. So again, the split level only exists in that one case. Yeah, so it means you can check the level on the preview mixer before turning it live, and it uses that level when you then turn it on. With the button, you can then turn it on, which is quite a nice feature. And so again, this layout just gives you a bit more control of that. And it could be that this is run instead of a pop-up layout. This could be a dedicated operator who has this on a separate workstation, and that can be done with Flyaway as well. It's not just a plus thing. We could have two clients, one which is more dedicated to audio control. So again, for a single operator, possibly they may never touch that, but it's important to understand what that little red marker means. It's that split audio situation. And there's various, if you like, use cases. So if you've got split audio, and you've turned off one, it's important to remember that if you turn it back on, it still has a split state, so it's not going to match the state of the preset bus because they're split. Whenever that split audio is enabled, program and preset have completely independent levels that it remembers. But again, you click on the button, it resets it. Whether it's on or off, it'll work out, and then when you next turn it on, it'll have the right state. And yeah, by default, if it's not on, when you move the program, it tracks the preset automatically. If you turn it off automatically, just by then turning it off, it doesn't turn the preset on, because again, you've got to choose to turn that on. So that's kind of basics of audio control. There's then some variation of how people might want to use the preset bus, and this very much comes down to whether or not people are traditional vision mixer operators or completely new to it. If people are completely new to it, they should have operated it how I've just been using it. That's nice and easy because you can train someone how to use that. But a couple of tweaks we added specifically for operators who work with traditional vision mixers are these two buttons here. Audio preset mimics program and DSK preset mimics program. I'll turn them both on and then you'll see the effect. If I turn off my DSKs, and I've turned off all my audio, now if I turn on my DSK1, you'll notice it turns on automatically on the preset as well. If I just turn it on a preset, it only turns on the preset. But in the case where I turn it on by turning it on the program, it turns on the preset. Similarly with the audio, if I turn on the audio 1, it turns it on the preset as well. The reason we did this is because of what I mentioned earlier, that in that transition area on a traditional vision mixer, you choose what the transition type is. And because normal operators, most of the time, that transition is just for transitioning backgrounds. Therefore, in their mind, they like to press a button to say, okay, I'm going to transition key 1. And because they like to press a button to say it's going to be a key 1 transition, the obvious one on this system would be to press this button, which has just therefore turned it off, and therefore when you auto-trans, the effect of that auto-trans is that it turns it off because I've just turned it off. So again, it was something that, because when we saw some operators using this in the first place, they were pressing buttons when they didn't need to, and we spotted that it was causing a problem, and therefore we've changed the logic to allow it to work this way. So those mimic functions are more kind of to suit the mindset of a traditional vision operator. I'm going to turn them off because they generally confuse me. I don't really like those features, but that's because I'm not a vision operator, I think. So that's the basics. Right, you'll then have noticed auto on both the audio and the background. We've got this transition option called auto. It's easier to understand a bit in the audio section, but what it basically means is if you have it in auto, you can make it more customized so that different sources can have a different transition behavior. So you may want a particular source that always cuts on and off, really fast on, really fast off. But maybe a microphone source, you'll maybe want it to fade on and off a bit slower. So we can change all that in the configuration pop-ups. Similarly, auto on the background for the main video sources, you can see we've got, in this particular system, we've got 3 live SDI sources. We've then got black bars and stills. We could replace them with any type of stills potentially, but maybe you might want a behavior that when you transition between a video source and a still, you want it to do a mix. But maybe you always, you can change some of this behavior. And again, this is more suited perhaps to the simpler layouts, but it could be applicable to this layout, and that's why we've left it on it. Now, these are all, the behavior of these autos are configured in some of the pop-ups in a minute. So I'll take you through those in a minute, but we'll have to work through those config screens bit by bit, I suppose.
The auto buttons work on pre-configured.
Yeah, you'll see the configure in a minute when we open up those screens, and then I'll come back and show you the effect of them. The only other things that on this bottom button panel that I haven't mentioned are the transport controls. And now this is something that we've been talking about dropping from IPhrame version 1, which if we did drop, then obviously if all of your videos have got them in, then that would be a bit annoying. So we kind of have to decide whether to keep them or not. They are functional. Basically this VT1 player, if I switch to this source, you can see it was a bit slow to switch to it the first time. So before you do any videos of anything, make sure you switch to each of the sources. The first time you can use a source with iPhrame, it can sometimes be a bit slow to connect to it. It shouldn't. I would consider that a bug myself, but again, just to avoid it, it's just worth clicking through to make sure that they all work. So these are 2 player sources, and you can see if I cue to the beginning, and you see the frame changes, and if I click play, then it starts playing. See, there was a bit of a lag on it, so again, this is why we were thinking of dropping it, because it's not properly frame accurate in terms of how it behaves. If I pause, for example, just after the man's finished past the boy, it's not representative, so it's not properly frame accurate currently. Hence why we might drop it, and they might just become more stills. And part of me thinks we should probably just do that, because then it takes the issue away, and gives you more flexibility with stills potentially.
Would this be available in a traditional vision mixing setup? These transport?
No, not to the vision operator, because typically you'd have a dedicated physical person who's pressing play when they go to that source. In some setups, particularly more news studio type operation where they can't afford to have a big team of people, they might link this up via what's called a GPI, a general purpose interface, a little electrical trigger that the vision mixer, which is obviously a separate system to the thing playing the video, the VT. Obviously now they're typically video servers as opposed to tape machines, but they can still call them VTs. So when you go to that source, it fires a GPI which plays hits play on on the control. So you can have this level of automation, I suppose. So yeah, eventually that will probably be more of a version 1.1 thing. We should have that in for the backgrounds, because there's this problem with the fact it's a bit more contentious with them not being frame accurate. Where we might probably leave them though is for overlays. So if I you'll notice I've clicked Q to the beginning. If I turn on this DSK4 now, you'll notice it's automatically, as I clicked on it, started playing it. That's because of these two options here that are lit up. Play VT on program auto and play DSK on program auto. So that just basically means send a play trigger when you select when that source goes live, which is why you then saw that it animated the graphic. What it doesn't do is it doesn't queue it to the beginning though. You have to have pre-queued it. So because that would take time, because it takes time. So if you've turned the source live, you might potentially see a flash frame of the end frame of the video. So that's the operator's problem to make sure it's pre-queued if they want to do it. And again, you could turn those features off, and then even if you've queued it to the beginning, when you turn it on, you don't see it until you actually hit play, and then it plays the graphic. So, and again, you could, if you wanted to, make this more complex and have dedicated operators who just control graphics. And in future, probably a version 1.1 version, instead of this button having only one graphic, it would have a small playlist of graphics, so that it can have a separate user interface to choose which graphic you actually want to play, rather than being, at this point in version 1, it's going to be it's fixed to one graphic. So you can see the live one. If I click that, it should play live, he says, as he doesn't see it.
You've got the button turned off.
Oh, it didn't play. Oh, there we go. There you go. Yeah, it didn't auto-play. Let me turn them back on. Those ones I do always leave on because they are very useful and I kind of come to expect them. So that's the transport controls. Right, there's one other mode button on here which I should explain. Audio follow video. Again, this is very much dependent on the type of production people are using. If you're doing the kind of switching between different feeds, and each feed has audio on it, this is the kind of mode where you'd want to use audio follow video, because you don't want the complication of having to mess around with audio faders or remembering to turn the audio on if you really just want it to follow what the video is doing. So in this case, you'll see audio follow video. If I go SDI1, it puts audio 1 on. SDI2, audio 2. SDI3, audio 3. The mapping of what audio goes with which source, I'll show you in a moment. That is configurable. You'll see.
You still tell it to put on fade out the previous audio, or does it just flat out?
Yes. So if you do slow, for example, even if I put cut on the background, you'll see I've cut the video, but it does transition the audio. So you can choose a different behavior. And if you have manually put an audio on and obviously then transition to it, it will take off the audio. And obviously if you're moving away from it, it'll bring it on. So you can still do that. But if I'm changing things that aren't affected by going between SDI 3 and 4, maybe this might be a commentator's mic. Again, it's only taking the audio out if it related to the SDI that's being turned off. If you as you're leaving that source, it takes out the associated audio, leaves everything else, because obviously there might be more complex things going on that it doesn't know about, and that would then be very hard to figure out what to do. Yeah, so let's just turn them off. I'll show you the configuration of that in a moment too. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for the buttons on the main form. I suppose there's a mute button. It lowers the level. Does it? I think it follows the speed on here, so it mutes with the transition behavior you see over here. One final thing, obviously, as I've been turning on, I can hear the metronome in my ear right now. If that's too loud, I can click on this little icon here, which opens up this window, and I can change the volume on here, so that rather than messing around with dropping back into Windows to change the volume in Windows, we can change it in here.
That's just a system change. That's the output.
This is only for monitoring. That's only for my inner ear. So you can see the VU meters going going out on the program are unaffected by this. This is completely irrelevant. So again, what you mustn't do as an operator is think, oh, well, this is very loud in my ear, I'm going to turn it down. Because it may just be that your headphones are too loud and it's perfectly fine, but this is where you kind of potentially have to trust the audio monitors or use some external audio monitoring. We could make a version of this layout where we actually put some graduations against these VU meters to give you a better indication of what the output level is. We'll wait for customer feedback on that. Obviously, it would then have a visual impact on getting a lot more cluttered. So we'll have to see. And this is just a quick mute as well. And if you've got talkback enabled on the system, then your local mix of talkback again can be in your ear, and you might want to use that to tweak the relative levels of talkback versus the sound monitoring. But of course, the easiest thing to do is just remember you can just turn them off. So if all of those are not lit, you don't hear anything. So that's, I think, all the buttons now on here. Just in case you think of it later, you'll see there's a little mute icon. Do you remember that from iPhrame Vision of old? It used to be this is the way you would turn on the monitoring of the audio for each of the fields. These have no effect whatsoever anymore. They need to be removed. It's just we've never got round to removing them. This button used to show and hide the VU meters, and they still actually do work on there, because we do, on the server end, we do show the VU meters because they're quite useful to show you what the embedded audio is on that SDI. But on the client, they don't have any effect, and we should probably hide them. But if you hide them, it takes the label out as well. And of course, we like the label because we use it to indicate tally state. When I first started the system up, you'll remember I said there was an error state because it showed two were lit up at the same time, which should never happen. If I'm doing a slow transition, if I'm doing any sort of vision mix from SDI1 to SDI2, you'll notice there's a brief period where they are both lit because they represent the fact that that source is contributing to the output. So in general, on the program bus or wherever you see red, it is because that source is contributing to the output. Obviously, because it's not standard vision mixer behavior, we don't light up multiple program buttons at the same time. They just behave like a radio button. So we transition it straight away, but the tally stays active. So yeah, we call those red lights, if you like, we call them the tallies. That's the traditional term that broadcasters would expect to, tally indicators or on-air indicators. Right, config screens. These are all accessed at the top. There are 6 of them currently. Background sources. So we can see at the moment we've got 8 configured on this layout. And it says SDI1. I could call this metronome, and you can see that immediately updates. If I need it to break across the line, that's for my choice. I just have to put a space in it and obviously figure it out. It will automatically, if you'd use short words, and it could do it, it will word wrap. You can also put a description, so you could say SDI input 1 in there, if I can spell it right. And that long name gets displayed on a tooltip. So if you hover your mouse over it, it's displayed as a tooltip. So again, it can be useful to see a bit more information. I won't go changing any of the others. I remember I mentioned the auto button. Again, this is really more designed for the simple layout, not necessarily this program preset behavior, but it works in this behavior. You see, I've got 5 different types defined, and I've defined black bars and still as type B, and VT1 and VT2 in this case is type C. That's actually the next pop-up config layout. Is this is we can change those aliases. So I could say live, stills, players, and I can say here. You'll see from type A to type A, cut transition. From type A to type B, fast transition. So I've done that in both cases, but it's configurable. In and out is configurable. But from type B to type B is a slow transition. So now if I go to auto, if I go, it's cutting. Let's turn off the audio because it's just going to be annoying. That's cutting, but if I go to still, see it does a fast mix. If I go still to bars, it does a slow mix, slow mix, slow mix, fast mix, cut, cut. So this can make it easier to achieve a certain look for a program for an operator who is perhaps less skilled. Don't know a nice way of saying that, but you know, it's easier to make a more formulaic production, which is easier to control, and that's what how that relates. And of course, if you put the actual alias names in, it makes it easier to explain what those are doing. The bit down the bottom is the audio mapping, the linked audio. So you can see source 1, 2, 3 we're linked to audio 1, audio 2, and audio 3. Maybe I could set it so that they're all audio 1, and maybe if I go to the still, it takes to audio 3. So that takes effect if I turn on that audio follow video again. If I now go between audio 1, 2, 3, it's not changing the things, but if I go to the still, you see it's changed to 3. So all of that is very dynamic now, can be changed whenever the program's in action.
Have we currently got ways of saving different layouts? Like templates, essentially?
No. No, it's whatever the current set is. Obviously, it should survive being power cycled and stuff. It should bring that back up, but it would be sensible as a kind of start of day checks is to check various config is as it needs to be done. We have started putting various locks on the text and things, so you can lock the text fields to prevent accidental change. But in version 1, we don't have the ability to prevent people from unlocking because there is no concept of different levels of user or anything. We could potentially add that. It would be more of a Lua script logic layer, so it isn't really a development thing, although all Lua script takes development time and debugging time, so it would have a time impact. Mute master when live, that's very much for the simple layout. It really doesn't make sense for this. The concept here is that if you set that, maybe I'll do that on the black. So the black, this is a still, mute master when live. If I then go to black, it should mute the feed. But again, I don't think the logic's ever been fully fleshed out for that because it was.
You can see the audio bars aren't going.
I think that's just because it turned off the audio. It's more by look than anything else. I've turned it on, but yes, I think it's we changed the way that config works, and because I never finished it in the December build, and then we started doing the new world, it should be working when Miguel's got the new world. But it's more applicable to the BBC Scotland setup. That whole thing about the auto stuff is really more applicable to the simple layout, which is this is the program preset layout. We then have the simple layout. So that's that config. DSK sources, it's really just names, what names you want the buttons to have. So it's just the name on the buttons. Audio source is a bit more complex. You'll see for each audio source we've got 2 sets of VU meters. That's because in here we can actually tweak the levels and the relative balance of left and right. So if, for example, you can see, let's do this on number 3 because the VU meters are fairly stable. Let's say I thought it was a bit too loud. I can lower that level, in this case minus 60 dB. You can just about tell it's slightly lower. I can then also say I want it to be balanced to the right. Essentially, this doesn't apply any gain at all. It just attenuates the opposite channel. So you can see the left leg has now dropped right down, and if I go the opposite way to left, it drops the right side. And obviously we can find somewhere in between, which is right, or whatever the required behavior is. This will be expanded in future, probably in version 1.1, to have more EQ settings, so high, mid, low, various parameters for high cut, low cut, and some other parameters. So there are some screenshots of that around, but that will be a version 1.1, and it'll just change this screenshot basically. You can see I can change the names just as below. In the case of audio, above the audio buttons is where the long name is displayed. I don't think we're doing the tooltips on here. Oh, it does the tooltip as well, but we've also got a text label display because it's more important for those to have a bit more explanation typically of what they are. If it's microphones, you need to know whose microphone it is. So you can't always simplify it down to just a handful of characters. And here's the auto transition behavior. So you can see I can set, channel 1 to cut, channel 2 to fast, 3 to medium, and 4 to slow. And then if I put them into auto, that cuts on and off. That's a fast transition on and off. That's a medium transition on and off. And that's a slow transition on and off. So that's where the auto comes into it. So pre and post EQ. I don't think this is working in this version. You should be able to turn on the monitoring for pre-EQ. It's turned on, I can hear it, but it's not updated the UI, which now means that's probably going to be stuck in my ear forever, which could be a problem. Yeah. So what I'm going to do next to stop this is go to the next config screen, which is what audio is mapped to those 8 channels. So in the mixing environment, we only have 8 channels exposed on the layout. We could have many, many more. The engine is actually capable of switching many thousands of channels. We've chosen to do 8 stereo pairs in this case. You should have VU meters bobbing up and down on here. I'll show you that. Obviously it should look like that. We should be sending that VU meter data through to the client, and it should be bobbing up and down. It's missing from the demo setup, but it will be there in the new world. And you can see this is basically saying SDI input, which has potentially 16 embedded audio inputs. I'm taking channel 1 to be audio 1 left and channel 2 to be audio 1 right. So if I just take those away, there we go, metronome's gone, because I'm now listening to embedded audio 3 and 4, and there's nothing on those, which is empty, which is where on the server end, because we've got the burnt-in VU meters, level meters, you can kind of see the presence on there. And if you saw the things bouncing around on that layout, you can see that there's no audio there. So if, for example, just on the other screen I'm opening up the form, I can see on SDI input 3, for example, that there is actually audio on 5 and 6. So if we were listening to this CBeebies clip and it was a bit glitchy or there was some problem with the audio, you might get told by an engineer, actually, stop using the audio on 1 and 2, use the audio on 5 and 6 instead. So we can come down here, we can say 5 and 6, and the audio is still the same. Maybe it's now cleaner, or maybe it's now a different language, because that's often a common use for those different mappings. Turn that off. And we've got all of the SonFX different inputs in there as well. Internally in Flyaway, there's a SonFX audio card. The SonFX audio card supports a few different modes of operation, and the SPG unit, the connection panel unit in Flyaway, can support only the analog connections currently. But you can see on this we've got mono mic 1 and 2, stereo mic left to right, line in 1 and 2, line in 2, whatever, they're stereo line-ins. And then we've got the digital inputs as well. You have to configure the SonFX card appropriately. You can choose either microphone level or line level, and then whichever device is appropriate in here. So again, that's their standard Windows driver. So you have to drop down into Windows for that. Recording devices. Find the. Oh, we're not on that machine, so you can't do it from this machine. You have to do it on the server end. But yes, it's through that normal Windows driver interface. We are looking at options for, can we just change those settings through an API to them. They do have an API, but we're not sure if we can control it yet. So it might be, if we can control it through the API, therefore might be something we can expose through to the client. But then typically, whoever's plugging the signals in on site needs to be the one configuring that, because one of the things the SonFX card can do, for example, is turn on a thing called phantom power, where it stuffs 48 volts up the XLR so that it can essentially give power to a microphone head. And of course, if you plug a microphone in that's not expecting it, it goes bang and breaks that microphone. So yeah, you really should only be changing those kind of parameters on the server end anyway.
Out of interest, do we have any sort of like auto audio control balancing?
None. No.
Limiting or anything like that?
No. And equally, if you, I mean, this metronome clip is very, very high. If I sorry, that's not the metronome clip. If I put lots of gain on it, oh, of course we mapped it away, those two. If I increase the gain plus 6 dBs on there, and maybe on here, now that it's 6 dBs higher, I add another 6 dBs. Thereby I've added 12 decibels of gain, and on the master output I can go plus 6 again. If I listen to the program output now, every now and then I can hear it clipping and it sounds quite poor. This isn't too bad actually because there's enough headroom. It isn't actually that, it isn't clipping yet, there was enough headroom, but if it was a very loud signal, we're talking about digital gain here, so you will immediately, as soon as you hit that maximum threshold, it will sound awful. Yes, yeah. And that's why if we look at the simple layout, you'll see it's limited to 100% or 0 dB, because they can't then apply any gain to it. They can't run there's no risk of them making it go clipping at all. They can only lower the volume. I need to turn this thing off in my ear. It's doing my head in. Right, and then the only other pop-up was another, basically explaining these 5 mode switches, but there's actually 2 more as well. There's DSK follow auto trans and audio follow auto trans, which generally I would always leave on. This basically means that when you're doing an auto trans, let's do this, audio 1, 2, 3, 4 on preset. We'll do an auto trans. If I tell it to do a fast mix auto trans, you'll see they all come together. They all move at the same rate. They go to different levels because they go to the level they've been restored at. If I turn off audio follow auto trans, they use the state that's defined up here. So in this case, I could say I want them to cut. So they've all cut, the video fades, which in a way is quite nice that you can choose a behavior. But it could also get very complex and say auto, and then you've got different speeds, which is pretty cool. But again, more complex from an operational point of view. So I generally leave that on, and that's why I've not even put it on the main UI, because it's just an extra level of complexity that you're thinking, okay, I want things to transition using a fast mix, and then things do something different. And the same with true of the overlays. Where it might be particularly useful on an overlay is if you've got something like that live graphic, for example. You know, when we turn that on, it starts with an empty frame and then it animates on, it appears. So what you don't really want is for it to be fading on, because the appearance of it is already kind of baked into the animation. So in that case, you might want it to cut on, even if you're doing a mix on the video level. So that's kind of one of those use cases where you probably would want the DSK to cut on, even though you're mixing the background video. That's kind of where that came from. So there's a bit more text, me trying to describe those features in a bit more detail. And obviously, if I turn them on and off from here, it's the same button fundamentally, controlling on the layout. There is one more button on this layout that you need to be aware of, and hopefully you'll never need it. But it's and you probably don't want to need to include this in training. But if something goes wrong during an auto trans, and any of those elements that are part of the auto trans don't complete their transition, the auto trans button will stay lit up, and it won't flip-flop the state. In that circumstance, you can click this reset button up here, reset transitional state variables. So if the system misbehaves for any reason, that's just a general purpose, you know, reset everything, rather than having to go and restart something, which is what we were having to do in the past. So again, it's probably not a bad thing to mention, but we've got to find a way to politically spin it, that it's, you know, if you have any problems or feel that something's not behaving right, click it. You know, that's the thing that resets some things. There's no visual indication that anything's changed, but I suppose I could change this text here or something maybe. And obviously, close button is a close button. I'll close that in a minute. The only other thing that operators may see is if the link goes down, you get a black and yellow flashing, and obviously we've lost connection, so we've lost the proxies. I can not do any mixing right now, but what I can do is, potentially if there was some audio glitch in my ear or something, I could be turning the volume down. Particularly good in this version because you'll see the audio still looks like it's happening. In the new world, the audio should stop because, of course, why is there any audio? We've lost the connection. This was an old bug that you basically got like a 5-second shadow of the thing going in a loop, which was very wrong. And then the idea is when you plug this back in, this state should clear and it should become operational again. And you can see at the top it says connection lost since, and this should update in a minute to connection restored and how many times the link's been down. At the moment, the logic for this isn't as robust as it should be. Miguel's got to rewrite it all in his code to make it better.
Is there anywhere like a report window for lost frames or anything like that?
No. Yeah, well, that would be how many times the link's down, but that's the closest I've got to a status display of anything. So I could potentially put more in that in the future. We've talked about potentially having pop-ups as well to have notifications and stuff.
So if you have internet issues or something, you start losing frames, how to handle that? It's like not a perfect thing.
So the VBN smooths that out, so that as long as there's a good enough connection, a bit of a connection, the VBN's quite good at making sure the data gets through. So it protects for minor glitches in the network. Obviously, if it goes down properly, then you're going to lose connection. You're going to be very obvious. Someone can always operate it from the remote end, though. So you could always have a guy on site who, if in an emergency, they controlled it from here. So you could always do that. And that's pretty much it.
When an operator is logging into the client, or it probably doesn't make any difference, but is it best that this is up and running before they do?
Yes. It makes no sense to start this until the server's up and running, really. It wouldn't have anything to connect to, and it has to get its time reference from there and all of its video feeds from there. So again, there's no harm if I was to shut all this system down here, start the client up first, and then start the server up. It should find it and it should connect and should pick up. My only hesitance is, of course, we don't typically QA that way around, and therefore I wonder is it truly robust in that sense? But it should be. It should be.
Do you currently have a UI for loading up sources, or is that still done?
No, changing what the sources are is more fundamental to the system. So, if we had still let's say 5 stills, we'd make it so that you have to call them a particular name and they'd be in C media, still 1.png and whichever, rather than changing the config. We're the ones who can tweak it. It's the easiest way. As I'm recording this anyway, I don't think there's a priority to do the simple layout yet, but I'll quickly just show you that just so we've got it. Alt F4. Again, there's a bug in this version. It's been fixed in the new world. The close button does work in the new world. Where's my Purple Service Manager? So the simple client. This is the one that's more the BBC Scotland style setup, and hopefully this will make some of the auto transition stuff a bit more obvious why they want it. And again, it's because it's more for a simple operator. So again, because we don't have a program preset bus in this anymore in this domain. We therefore initialize the preview mixer to be used to preview the dynamic straps, the graphics we can type text over, to make sure that initialization is done right. And you can see my labels are all, it says bar suitcase logo live. If I close this window, it triggers the reinitialization of the state variables. If we do it that way in the new world, I'm not sure. I mean, this was specifically done for the demo environment to allow us to switch between both in the demo. But you can see now it's put, instead of black, it's got a checkerboard, and these have been relabeled dynamic straps. But everything.
The source names are carried across from the other config. Can they be changed in the simple view?
Yeah, so we've got the same config things. I've just, to make the UI look less scary, I've hidden them in a one-step, removed them, but this is exactly the same configuration screen. So yes, potentially I can put that back to say SDI1. And you can see in this case I can switch between. Oh, incidentally, those are toggles, so you can turn them on and off. You don't have to use the closed. You can just any pop-up button, you can turn it off by clicking on the button again, which is quite nice. So yeah, in this case, the operator in the BBC Scotland sense is switching between SDI sources, but they can also, before the program starts, or if they need to, they can put a still up. And again, this is where it really should be in auto mode, and I don't think these have been configured. There's an extra pop-up here for stills, because there's now actually still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because we've got lots of stills, and all of these need to be set as type B, because that's the still type in my setup. I think that must be funny. So that means now they're cutting between. If I go to a still, it fades to it, and then if I go between stills, it fades between them nice and slowly, and they can obviously replace the stock stills with whatever they like. But interestingly, this is a toggle, so the operator's turned on a still saying, you know, someone's got their boobs out, put a holding slide up. When they're finished, you click on still again, and it remembers which SDI which primary source you want. So it's slightly different, because you know, in the program preset, you have to hot cut. It's a radio button. You can only press something that isn't active. In this case, you can click on still, and then click on it again, and it turns it back on. Now notice still 8, it muted it, because this one was designed to be one which was, you know, oh, we apologise for any offence that you might have caused, you know. So that one has been hard cut, but that's what that tick box should replace. So it's currently done in a slightly different. The config stored in a hard coded way. I hadn't finished making it more dynamic.
What if they wanted to change camera while they've got that still up in this view? They just can't do it.
Can't. No, you can't, because it's when you do it, it last takes precedence. So that, but again, you can if you want to come back to it rather than coming back to SDI2, yes, you can just click SDI1 and it goes to it.
But this is specifically for the BBC's requirements.
This was for BBC Scotland's kind of live compliance, but it's quite a nice use case. Notice as well, rather than just the 4 DSKs, we've now got 8, actually 10, because these 2 were the dynamic ones. But it's still fundamentally limited to 4. So as I turn them on, you can see it's lighting 1, 2, 3. It's allocating them to those. It's still using the 4 DSK channels. It's just dynamically allocating a different graphic to them and then starting them up.
Sorry, you go ahead.
What's limiting us to 4 graphics?
The IPhrame engine itself, if you look at the engine, actually I can show it on here because then it's captured. So this is the IPhrame engine that's running either the program or the preset, I don't know. In the new version we've got, it does actually append the name of the config file after it, so you can tell. If you press Control Alt M in the new world, Control M in it's Alt M in the new world, Control M in the old world. What we call the magic panel, it allows you to see what's allocated to which channels. So the engine itself is fundamentally a 6-layer compositor. And so we use layers A and B for the background, so you can do transitions between different video sources, and then we have 4 more layers, so 4 DSKs. So that's the limitation. We could make that bigger, but Phil would have to rewrite the engine to support more or to make it configurable. So on the price list you'll see that there was a 6-layer engine and a 2-layer engine. The 2-layer engine would allow you to do clean switching, or it would allow you to do a single key of a graphic, but you couldn't do both. If you want to do both, that's more complex. You need a full engine, you know. So notice as well this overlay 8, which didn't turn on. Why didn't it not light up? Who knows why it's not lighting up? Oh, it stopped working.
So with the reset button fix it?
I suspect that's because I opened up that panel. So it's possibly on that engine that I just had running, wherever it's gone. Oh, it's possible that I shut it by accident. Check. Yeah, I closed it. That's why it wasn't changing. There we go. So there we go. So if I turn on overlay 8, let's just unmute stuff. Hang on. I wanted to find one that mutes it. So still 8 mutes it. Overlay 7 mutes it. If I turn on still 8 and overlay 7 and so on and turn off still 8, it stays muted, and it keeps track of if you've got anything that's set to be a muted thing, like the apology strap or the apology slide or something, it does keep track of it. Notice as well that the slider here is maxed out. It's at full volume and it's in percent because the operator is not proficient with decibels. They don't make sense to people who aren't audio engineers, so they go between 0, mute, and 100% full volume. They can't apply gain. If it's a bit too quiet, an engineer can come along and open up the audio levels tab, and in here they could potentially apply gain on the individual channels or on the master if they need to. It'd make more sense to do it on the individual channels. Yes, someone who's not scared by decibels potentially. But again, this is just to highlight the different hybrid kind of layout we can do. So. I think once we've done the others, I think we probably should, because it's quite nice. It's a nice use case. I quite like it. Yeah, well, and yes, and if we deliver it to them, that's great, because they can point people at it. In fact, that's probably the most likely people who'd actually look at it, potentially. So Alt F